Hello, this is the fourth of five linked podcasts that look at the early years of the Nazi Party. So we've looked at who were the Nazis, we've looked at the birth of the party and Hitler taking control. This podcast looks at the crisis year of 1923. Okay, so as you can see, we're focusing in on the French occupation of the Ruhr and the hyperinflation. Okay, so a bit of background. When the war ended, remember in 1919, the German economy was in a bad state. Well, the war actually ended in 1918, but we're talking about the first year of peace after the war. The German economy was in a bad state. Actually, the German economy had not been in a great state even before World War I. She was spending more money, and Germany was spending more money than she actually had, a bit like a person has a bank overdraft. German expenditure was greater than income, so effectively the country was in debt. Now, by the end of World War I, Germany was even more in debt. So we'll make sure you use that word, in debt. And of course, the debts got worse and worse because she now owes 6.6 thousand million pounds in reparations. So effectively, Germany was seriously short of money. Now, when you've got a shortage of anything, it becomes more valuable. I think that is basic economic sense. And if you've got a shortage of something, people are prepared to pay more for it. So basically, if there's a shortage of money, it becomes more valuable. And if people are prepared to pay more for money, effectively the price of money goes up. And this is what we call inflation, the words at the bottom, okay? Another basic economic principle is what the worst thing you can do if a country has got inflation, in other words, prices going up, because the country is short of money, the worst thing you can do is actually try to resolve the problem by printing more and more money, which is what the German government chose to do. So that was a bad policy, and because in the end that may temporarily solve the problem in the short term, but actually in the long term it just makes the problem even worse. So what was happening between 1919 and 22, prices were going up, there was an inflation, okay? Income is falling, expenditure has gone up because she had to pay reparations, shortage of money, prices were going up. Now, the end of 1922, basically the German government was virtually on the edge of bankruptcy, and so they were supposed to make monthly payments to the French reparations. Now, reparations was usually paid in what we call in kind. In other words, Germany had to ship, coal, iron, timber to the French and the Belgium. Well, they stopped the deliveries in December. They simply couldn't afford it anymore. And so what then happened was very, very significant. In January 1923, the French troops invaded Germany. Now remember, the Rhineland, and you can see it on the map here, which is in green, so the Rhineland area, it was still, it was territory that had not been taken away from Germany. At the end of World War I, it was German territory, but Germany was not allowed to keep any troops in the Rhineland. So it was very easy for France to invade Germany, and they could sweep right the way through the Rhineland, and where they were aiming for was Germany's biggest industrial region, the Ruhr, which I've just circled there in blue for you so you can see it. It was actually the biggest industrial region of Europe, rich in iron and coal, a huge number of factories. And effectively the French marched in and occupied the Ruhr to seize the German goods. They said, well, you're not going to pay us reparations, we're going to basically seize it. Now, the French expected the German factory workers to carry on working for them. But at this moment in time, Hebert, the leader of Germany in Berlin, actually made for the first time a popular decision. Remember, he's not the most popular man in Germany, having signed the Treaty of Versailles, but on this occasion he made a decision which was to stand up for Germany, and he called upon all the German workers in the Ruhr to go on strike, to refuse to obey the orders of the French soldiers who'd occupied that region. And this is what we call passive resistance. Passive resistance, okay? It's resisting passively. You're not fighting back, you're not using violence, you're just refusing to cooperate. Now, it was a popular decision in the short term, but in the long term, after a few weeks, it simply made the inflation worse because effectively the factories were going on slow, they were producing less and less, so the shortage of goods was increasing, and what this did is basically, remember, prices were going up, there was an inflation, but it suddenly turned the inflation into what we call a hyperinflation. You can see that here. So here you can see the inflation, prices were going up, and then in January 1923 that became a hyperinflation, and literally prices went through the roof. Okay, so something that had been worth 1 mark in 1918 is now worth a billion marks effectively by the end of 1923. Now what does this basically do? It meant that anybody who had savings, and savings includes pensions. Pensions is just a type of saving for poor people. But people who got savings, effectively, their savings were made worthless. So, for example, if a family has saved, say, 6,000 marks, and 6,000 marks is a lot of money. It was enough to buy, I don't know, a motor car or something. Well, effectively, by the end of 1923, that 6,000 marks couldn't even buy you a loaf of bread. So all that time and effort saving money, it's been lost. Now, who are the people, remember, who save money? It's the middle classes. The middle classes are on a reasonable income and earn more than they actually spend. So they can put enough aside each month to actually save something. So it did in particular hit the middle classes, the reasonably well-off people of Germany. Okay. Other features, farmers actually did okay. Okay, because if prices go up, then effectively farmers would benefit from those rising prices. So not everybody did badly with the hyperinflation. Wages also went up. Mustn't forget that, but they didn't rise at the same rate as prices. So effectively people couldn't afford basic foods. And there's the point. In particular, it was the middle classes who lost faith in the government. Now remember, the middle classes had already lost faith in the government because the middle classes tend to be nationalistic. We did that in a previous podcast. And nationalism is about belief in your country, and of course the middle classes had already lost faith in the government for signing the Treaty of Versailles. So the hyperinflation for many middle class people was another nail in the coffin of the Weimar Republic. But remember, hyperinflation did not hit everyone badly. So when you talk about this in the exam, make sure you balance it out with a paragraph that points out that some people did well. In particular, businessmen with initiative made money. It works both ways. If you've got savings, your savings are wiped out, but many businessmen basically run their business on debt. In other words, they borrow money. So if you borrowed, say, 10,000 marks to get your business going, you owe 10,000 marks. Well, suddenly by end of 1923, 10,000 marks is worth nothing. So effectively it wipes out your debts. So many businessmen did okay. We've already mentioned farmers. Benefited. I mean, you've always got land, you can always resort to barter trading if prices go up, so you're not going to be starving if you're a farmer, and so farmers and landowners on the whole did well. There is an example of the impact of the price of bread. In 1919, a loaf of bread cost 1 mark. A mark is the German currency. By July, a loaf of bread cost 3,465 marks, and by November 1923, which was the worst month of the hyperinflation, a loaf of bread cost 1.5 million marks. One other point, and really remember this problem, this economic crisis of 1923 was not a depression. Okay, it was not a depression. It is an inflation. Do not get this confused with what happened 6 years later in 1929 when the Wall Street crash happened. because that triggered another economic crisis that was called the Great Depression. Don't get those two things confused. The Great Depression was about people losing jobs. In 1923, people were not losing jobs. Okay, in fact, there was pretty much full employment in Germany in 1923. People had jobs. The problem in 1923 was the fact that prices were going up and their wages couldn't keep up with the price rises. So there's the usual quick factual test. Pause the podcast, have a go at that, write them down, make sure you know the answers, and then the answers to those questions are on that slide there. There is a podcast answer, so just referring you to that. The model answer to that question, and remember you've got 13 minutes for that, is in the folder. So print off that model answer, play the podcast, and you can access the podcast directly from the slideshow. There's a link on the slideshow, but you've also got the QR code there if you wanted to do it using a QR reader, and learn the answer off by heart. Best advice, you are revising for your mocks at the moment, get a sheet of paper, time yourself and try to write that answer in 13 minutes. Try to do exactly what the podcast shows you. Okay, practice is the way to do this. That's the end of this fourth podcast. One more podcast left in this series, which is about the Munich Putsch, Hitler's failed attempt to take power in November 1923. Thank you.